Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. As you know, we're looking into something that's gripped the nation in Canada. We have tens of thousands of auto sector jobs on the line here, so I appreciate your presence and your expertise very much. My first questions will be for Mr. Kingston. Of course, you are the President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicles Manufacturers Association, representing GM, Stellantis, and Ford in Canada, correct? Thank you. And so I'm sure you've been following the news, and of course Stellantis recently announced that it's moving production from the Brampton facility to the U.S., along with massive U.S. investments. At the same time, of course, as you know, Stellantis has received hundreds of millions of dollars in funding agreements, and some of that money has already flowed to various plans for retooling, as well as in addition to the $15 billion up to contract with the provincial and federal government for EV battery production. So you're aware of that. So from what we're understanding then, if Stellantis is moving production from the Brampton facility, putting up to 3,000 jobs at risk, it would seem that there was no Canada-wide jobs guarantee in those contracts. Can you comment on that?
So first of all, contracts between the federal government and Stellantis are confidential, as are all contracts negotiated between government and private sector companies. So I cannot comment specifically on any of the covenants in those agreements. But of the commitments that have been made by Stellantis, the overwhelming majority have already been executed. So of the $8 billion committed, about $7 billion has already been executed. So you have a new vehicle, electric vehicle, being built in Windsor. You've got the Nexstar battery plant that's 1,000 jobs, which is now operational. And the announcement with respect to Brampton, there are plans for Brampton. It's not a plant closure.
Right. So thank you for confirming that. So there are plans for the Bramptons that will be waiting on. I guess our concern as well is that from your other comments about the difficulties that the Canada auto sector is facing. In fact, you said Canada's competitiveness as an auto manufacturing jurisdiction is rapidly eroding, and certainly your comments today would signify that there are concerning events on the horizon. We're not through this yet in Canada, and it seems that all of your comments, in fact, would confirm that. So I suppose what we're concerned about is that this may not be the first of the Stellantis job layoffs or other companies. We're deeply concerned. We'll be paying close attention, but I did want to focus a little bit more on that. So the job losses to date that we're aware of at GM, the Oshawa plant was about 700 workers, I believe. GM in Ingersoll, of course, was announced recently. I believe it's about 500 workers lost, 1,200 more uncertain, and of course, Stellantis, 3,000 uncertain. These investments in the U.S., the tariffs from the U.S. remain, and now you mentioned the sort of the countermeasures that are being applied. It doesn't seem that at the federal level, they're talking a lot about, which is great, the steel and aluminum. We hope to see a deal there, but there doesn't seem to be as much of a primary focus from the federal government on getting an auto sector deal. So if all things remain the same and we don't get an auto sector deal in the coming months, can you give the committee some insight of where you think the auto sector and all the jobs that entails will be in a couple of years if nothing changes, if we don't get a deal?
Yeah, if we don't get an agreement and a removal of tariffs, and if we don't get, importantly, a renewal of CUSMA, because while the 232 tariffs are having an immediate impact now, if you're a company thinking about investing in Canada and you have no certainty regarding the future relationship with the United States, which is what is codified in our CUSMA agreement, it is virtually impossible to make long-term commitments into Canada. So we need a resolution on both items, and we need that to happen rapidly, or it will be very difficult for any new investment in this country, and it will be difficult to maintain existing investment. And frankly, that's not just an automotive story. That applies to virtually every sector of the Canadian economy. We are overwhelmingly dependent on the United States. That will never change. So we have to figure this out, and we have to do it quickly.
I appreciate that. And again, you mentioned it'll be difficult to maintain new investments. So again, concerning events on the horizon for future jobs under your purview and under the purview of others here. And so if we can't control what's going on with the U.S. and if we're not going to get an auto deal, what can we control in Canada to make us more competitive? Surely there's something locally that's within our sole purview to make Canada a more competitive environment for you to stay here and to expand here in the future. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. And we've laid out a number of priorities for the government to make Canada more competitive. Look, if you look back in history, when you have a protectionist U.S., fighting protectionism with protectionism doesn't work. We are the smaller partner, and we have to work in a new reality, in a more protectionist United States. Think about U.S. tariffs as equivalent to one of the largest corporate tax hikes in American history. That's what it ultimately does, costs borne by Americans, by American companies. So what do you do in response to that as Canada? You can retaliate you won't win that battle. We've learned that lesson. So your second best option is to make Canada ultra competitive. We should be doing everything possible right now to position this country as the best destination in the world for new auto investment and new investment writ large in every sector of the Canadian economy. So get rid of redundant, damaging regulations like the EV mandate, address interprovincial trade barriers that make it extremely costly and challenging for large companies to operate across this country, and build out a world-class pitch for new automotive investment. We can do that, and we can do that right now, and we can make Canada more cost competitive than the United States for auto manufacturing. So that's what I would propose we do.
I think I only have 5 seconds left. Thank you very much for your input. Appreciate it.